Today's story takes place in 1978, and it focuses on 5 young men that were best friends, basically inseparable, who all lived in Yuba City, California, and they came to be known as the Yuba City Five. These 5 young men were all either mildly intellectually disabled or had a mental health disability, but they were all very high functioning. Jack Hewitt was the youngest of the group. He was 24 years old. He was fairly uncomfortable in social situations and didn't do well around strangers, but around his 4 best friends, he blossomed and was incredibly funny and lighthearted and got along extremely well. Ted Wheeler was the oldest of the group. He was 32, and he kind of took a big brother approach to Jack Hewitt. He kind of looked after Jack specifically. Those two were very, very close. And Ted was known to actually occasionally make phone calls on Jack's behalf. When Jack felt uncomfortable calling a stranger on the phone, Ted would step in and be the bigger brother and make those phone calls for him. Bill Sterling was 29 years old, and he was deeply religious. He would spend a lot of his time going to the library where he would read Christian literature. Jack Madruga was 30 years old, and he was an Army veteran. However, he had been discharged from the Army after a medical evaluation determined that his IQ was too low. So he was discharged from the Army. He was the designated driver of the Yuba City Five because he was the only one of the 5 that had a driver's license. Jack loved being the driver because he loved his white and turquoise Montego, a 1969 Montego. It was like his prized possession, and he felt very proud driving the group around. Last but not least, you have Gary Mathias, who was the unofficial ringleader of the group. He was 25 years old. He also was an Army veteran, and he as well had been discharged following a medical evaluation where they diagnosed him with schizophrenia. So he was discharged and he went back home to Yuba City to move in with his parents. Initially, when he came home, he really struggled. They hadn't found a good way to manage his diagnosis. But eventually his doctor found the right mixture of medications and treatment, and he totally stabilized. And in fact was able to even hold down a job working part-time with his stepfather in his gardening business. Now, what really brought this group of 5 men together was their shared love of sports, really basketball specifically. When they got together, they were either talking about basketball, watching basketball, or playing basketball. The Gateway program that they were all enrolled in, the Voc Rehab program, they had a basketball team. And so they all played on that basketball team, and they were super passionate about that team. In February of 1978, their basketball team, along with a host of others, were slated to compete in a tournament where the winners of this tournament would get a free trip out to Los Angeles. And so the Yuba City Five was so excited about this tournament. Their tournament was supposed to start on February 25th, 1978, but their favorite basketball team, UC Davis, was playing just 50 miles away from them in Chico, California, on February 24th, so the night before their big tournament. So they decide that they want to go watch this game, right? They want to go out to Chico and root on their favorite team, but make sure they're back in time so they can get a good night's sleep before their tournament starts on the 25th. So they load up in Madruga's Montego, they drive the 50 miles out to Chico, California, and they root on their team, UC Davis, who ends up winning the game. Now, there were multiple witnesses that saw the Yuba City Five at this basketball game, so we know they were there. Following the game, the boys loaded up into Madruga's Montego, and they drove a short distance to a little convenience store in Chico where they got sodas and cartons of milk and some snacks. And the shop owner would actually say to investigators that he remembers them because they came in at about 10 p.m. and it was when he wanted to close down the shop. And so he remembers feeling annoyed when this big group, 5 men, come in and they're buying a bunch of stuff because it delayed the shop owner's ability to close down the store. That sighting at the convenience store would prove to be the last time anyone would see the boys alive. So that night, some of the boys' parents had stayed awake to wait for their son to come home. And when they didn't, and it was starting to get late, the parents started calling each other to ask if they had seen their son, and no one had. And so not only was it strange because the boys always told their parents and loved ones where they were going to be, but the idea that they would jeopardize a good night's sleep before this tournament that they had been obsessing about just seemed very, very uncharacteristic. And so by very early the next morning, all the families called the police and said something is wrong. So the police officer in charge of the investigation was Lieutenant Lance Ayers. Ayers had gone to high school with Ted Weir, so he had a personal connection to this investigation and was more motivated than perhaps he would have been otherwise to make sure they are doing everything in their power to find these boys. When the first few hours of the search don't turn anything up, Lieutenant Ayres decides that he's going to greatly expand their search radius. And it was because of this expanded search that just a few days later they were able to locate Jack Madruga's Montego car. Presumably, after the boys had gotten their snacks and drinks at the convenience store around 10 p.m., they would have been driving straight back to Yuba City because they had that big basketball tournament the next morning. But the car was found 70 miles away from Yuba City, away from Chico, up in a remote forest on a dirt road. The families of the boys had no idea. They couldn't even speculate why that car would have driven up that access road into this remote forest. There was no reason they'd be going up there, at least none that the families would have any understanding of. In addition to the strangeness surrounding why it was 70 miles away up in some remote forest, it also didn't make any sense that the boys had abandoned the vehicle. Even though it was covered in snow, there was no indication that it had been stuck in snow. There was a quarter tank of gas, so it didn't run out of gas. There were no keys in the ignition, so when the police had to hotwire it to drive it back, the car ran just fine. So there was no mechanical issues or any engine issues. They literally put it in park in the middle of nowhere and got out and left. They looked inside the vehicle and all that was in there was some wrappers and cans and cartons from the snacks that they had presumably been eating since they left that convenience store. But no keys, all the doors were shut, one window was down slightly, and some wrappers. That was it. So the search shifts to now looking exclusively in the area that this car was found. And over the first couple of days following the discovery of the car, they're looking everywhere and there's no sign of the boys. And then unfortunately, a massive snowstorm rolls in and basically covers everything to the point where it's impossible to search. And they had to abandon the search until the early spring when the snow had melted a bit. During this waiting period, the families of the boys put out rewards, were requesting information from everyone and anyone that had it. The police were fielding thousands of tips and unconfirmed sightings about where they could be, but none of it amounted to anything. They made no progress. They had no idea where these boys were. On June 4th, 1978, so just a little over 3 months after the boys had gone missing, some motorcyclists that had been on a long road trip happened to be up in those mountains on those dirt roads near where the Montego, the car, had been discovered. They were about 20 miles from that point, and they had found this cul-de-sac that they parked their bikes in, and they decided to just kind of stretch their legs, and they looked down a little ways off the cul-de-sac and they see this old looking trailer, and they decided just out of curiosity to just kind of walk over and see what it is. It would turn out that it was a trailer maintained by the Forestry Service, but it really hadn't been upkept in a long time. And so as they're walking over, they see that one of the windows has been broken, and they think, okay, it's more than likely abandoned, and they think they're just going to open the door, poke their head in, and just see what's in there, just purely out of curiosity, because they're kind of in the middle of nowhere, and they're just curious. So they go up, and they open the door, and they're immediately hit with this horrible, horrible smell, and they shut the door, and they're like, I don't know what's in there. It smells like death. It would turn out that it was death. It was one of the Yuba City Five. It was Ted Weir, who was the oldest of the group, who looked after Jack, who was the youngest of the group. It was his body. The mystery really only deepens when you go inside the trailer. Ted Weir was found wrapped in 8 blankets on this bed inside of this trailer. His feet were badly frostbitten and gangrenous. He looked like he had lost about 50% of his body weight, and he had growth on his face, like his beard, that showed he'd been laying there almost certainly for about 13 weeks. Ted had died from a combination of starvation and from exposure to the elements. But in the trailer, in plain sight, were loads of fire-making materials. You had paperback books, you had kindling, you had matches, you had firewood. In addition to the fire-making material, there was additional clothing, heavy clothing, like for cold weather. There was lots of food, like sea rations, military sea rations, where you can basically pop it open and you have some food, enough to feed someone for at least a year. So there's food in plain sight, there's fire-making supplies in plain sight, and also there was a propane tank out back that was basically full, that if they just turned it on, they could have turned on the heat inside of the trailer, and then you would have had heat for quite some time. But there was no signs that any of these supplies were ever touched. Now, one could potentially make the case that perhaps Ted, lacked the common sense to make a fire and to use up all the resources that were right in front of him. But Gary Mathias, his shoes were inside of that trailer, and Gary was in the army. And I was in the military, and I can tell you that the number one thing you're taught, pretty much no matter where you go in the military, is how to survive. You're taught to be resourceful and to use things in front of you to stay alive. And it just seems very strange that if you had Gary in there, that he wouldn't have immediately started a fire, or at least instructed the group to start a fire and eat the food, turn on the gas tank. Those are things that are just basic life-saving skills. A day after Weir's body is found inside of that trailer, searchers discover Sterling and Madruga's remains located approximately 11 miles from where the car had been located. Their remains showed signs of significant predation. Animals had gotten to their remains, and so there wasn't much left of them. But from what was left, investigators were able to determine that both had passed away from hypothermia. 2 days after Madruga and Sterling's remains are found, Jack Hewitt's remains are found as well, 2 miles from the trailer where Weir had been found. And Jack Hewitt had also died of hypothermia. So 4 of the 5 have been located, leaving Gary Mathias, who to this day has never been found. The only thing that investigators discovered was about a quarter mile away from the trailer where Weir was found, they found a bunch of blankets and a flashlight. It seems like that could have been where Gary at one point had been, but they don't know for how long, and they don't know where he went after that. So in addition to wondering where Gary went, you gotta ask yourself, why did these 5 men drive 70 miles out of the way the day before they knew they had this big basketball tournament that they were not about to jeopardize? Why did they drive 70 miles away onto a remote dirt road in a remote forest? Why did they then suddenly park their car, turn it off, take the keys out, shut the doors, and then hike 20 miles in the dead of night in a snowstorm to some random trailer, and then get in the trailer where there's ample food, there's ample blankets and additional clothes, but use none of it and die over a 13-week period from starvation and exposure? Why? And so there's many theories as to why this happened, ranging from, Gary Mathias is somehow responsible and that's why we haven't found him yet, to they simply took a wrong turn and that's how they wound up in this mountain in the middle of nowhere. But none of it really accounts for the purposefulness of all of their travel. If they had gotten lost, police believe they would have been maybe driving in loops. They wouldn't have just driven in a straight line, reached this point in the road and then gotten out. It's not consistent with being lost. So we don't know why they wound up on that road, or why they decided to go to that trailer, or what caused them not to use the supplies, but something happened. Something forced them to do this, and to this day, we don't know what it was. So I'd love to hear your theories as to why the Yuba City 5 did what they did. Give me your best theory and I'll do my best to go through and respond to as many as I possibly can. If you like this story and you want to hear more like it, I post stories like this 3, 4, 5 times a week. And if that's something you're interested in, I would encourage you to gently karate chop the like button and then subscribe to my channel and turn on all post notifications so you don't miss any of those weekly uploads. If you want to get in touch, early 1999, Christopher Case was living his best life. He was 35 years old. He had moved out to Seattle to pursue a career in music, and he had landed a job at a music company in Seattle, and he had risen to the rank of executive at that company. He was incredibly fit. He was known for being at the gym 7 days a week. He took vitamins. He took his health very seriously. He had loads of friends. People really liked him. He was very close with his family. And, despite all that, despite his popularity and success, he had been single for years, and even though he was not actively seeking a companion, his friends and family were continuously trying to set him up on dates. But Chris would prefer to not go on a date and actually stay home by himself and listen to music, because Chris had an obsession with a very specific type of music. He loved music from ancient times, specifically from Egypt. And so he would stay home instead of go out on dates and, crush ancient Egyptian music. That was like his idea of a great night. On April 11th of 1999, Chris was on a business trip because part of his job required a ton of travel. And he was on a trip with a couple of his coworkers, who are also friends of his. They go out to San Francisco, and on the 11th, they decide to go out for dinner that night. And one of his co-workers decides to bring along a friend who was someone that lived in the area. So they get to dinner, and one of them has their friend, who's an older woman, very attractive, very kind of intense-looking woman. She was about 20 years older than Chris. That was his guess. And she sits down, and the four of them are just kind of having a nice conversation. And at some point, the older woman really takes an interest in Chris, and Chris takes an interest in her, because it would turn out that they had a lot in common. And then she actually admitted to him that she was really into music from ancient times, and actually has a specific interest in music from ancient Egypt. And so to Chris, he's like, how can this be? And he's like, this is my passion. I love that type of music. And they really hit it off. Now, Chris was not looking for any sort of romantic involvement with this woman. He was just so excited to talk about something he loved. And so all night, Chris and this older woman are chatting it up, and they're super into each other. He was looking at her purely from a platonic sense, but it was becoming clear by the end of the night, at least Chris was realizing this, that she was looking at him with a romantic angle. She was interested in Chris. And in fact, right as he's kind of realizing this, she asks him if he wants to leave with her and go back to her place. And he politely declines, because he's not interested. He loved chatting with her about music and other things they had in common, but he wasn't interested in her romantically. And she became a little bit more aggressive and said, no, come on, let's get out of here. I got a place right down the road. We can go listen to music and hang out in my place. And he felt really uncomfortable, and he kept saying no, but she wouldn't let it go. And so finally, as she's literally trying to get him to say yes, he says, hey, you know what? I've had a long night. I'm going to go. And so he stands up to leave, and the woman goes from being very flirtatious and friendly to very angry at Chris. And she looks at him and kind of abruptly says to him,
I'm actually a witch, and I'm going to put a curse on you. You're going to be dead within a week.
Okay. And he just leaves. So the next morning, on April 12th, Chris gets up and he heads to the airport, and he flies back to Seattle. When he lands in Seattle, he calls his friend Sammy, who was one of his very close friends back when he lived on the East Coast. He just wanted to share this weird experience with a close friend. And so they're kind of laughing about the whole thing. Neither of them are taking the curse seriously at all. It was like, you really dodged a bullet. It's good you did not go home with her. So in good spirits, Chris hangs up the phone with Sammy, and for the next 24 hours, Chris would fall right back into his regular daily life in Seattle. Nothing out of the ordinary happened. But all that would change starting the night of April 13th, which would have been 48 hours after his encounter with this woman in San Francisco. So Chris lives alone. He doesn't have pets. And he gets into bed that night, and he's laying there, and before he falls asleep, he hears whispering coming from outside of his bedroom in the kitchen area, kind of near the front door. And he's thinking to himself, like, I didn't just hear whispering. Like, what? No one's in here. What's going on? And he's hearing the whispering, and then it kind of stops. And before he gets up to investigate, he's like, okay, I probably was just hearing things. That wasn't real. And he's just kind of laying there trying to go to sleep, and then he hears it again. Except now it's not coming from the kitchen area. It's coming from a separate area in his apartment outside of the room he's in. And so now he's wondering, like, did someone sneak into my house? Like, is there a burglar in my house right now? And so he quietly gets out of his bed, and he walks over to his door, he opens it up, and he can still hear the whispering, and it's coming from like his laundry room a little ways away. But as soon as he opens the door and he pokes his head out, the whispering stops. And he's just standing there, like, looking around, like, hoping that there isn't anything in his apartment. And then out of the corner of his eye, near the front door, he sees something dash across his periphery. Like a shadowy figure basically darts across the room. And so he looks over, and he's immediately afraid that it really is a burglar in his room. And as he's looking, he's turning the light on next to him, and he's looking around, and he starts hearing the whispering again, and now it's coming from another section of his house. So he just starts turning on all the lights and looking around to try to, like, make sure no one's in his apartment. He's not even thinking about the whispering. He's just looking for this shadowy figure that he saw run past him. And so he's looking all over his apartment. All the lights are on. It's a small apartment. And as soon as he feels comfortable that the door's locked still, everything's locked, and there's nobody here, that's when he realizes that whispering is still happening. And so he turns back around, and now the whispering's coming from his bedroom where he was. And so he walks over to his bedroom and looks inside, and he can't pinpoint the whispering. Like, he keeps hearing it and walking to wherever it's coming from, and as soon as he gets near it, the whispering stops. And he's thinking to himself, like, am I dreaming? Is this a dream? Am I losing my mind? Did somebody slip me something like last night? Like, what's wrong with me? So he has this horrible night where he's up all night chasing down whispers in his apartment that keep vanishing, and then seeing shadowy figures running around and lurking in corners, but he can't ever see them when he looks at them. And so the next morning on April 14th, when the sun comes up, he hasn't slept, the first phone call he makes is to Sammy, his friend. And he's totally panicked, and we know about this phone call because Sammy would tell police about all her interactions with Chris over the course of this week. She would say that he was totally panicked. And she even thought, as she's taking this phone call, that it's just so weird, that Chris is scared of noises in his apartment and like figures moving around in his apartment, because it's so unlike Chris. He's, definitely a skeptic. He's just like he's a no BS kind of guy. So the idea that he would suddenly be terrified of something paranormal running around his apartment just seems so unlike him. But as she's listening to him, he was so scared about what was in his apartment. He knew it wasn't a person because he looked everywhere. There was no people. And that's the only reason he didn't call the police, is because he didn't want to tell the police that some shadow figure that's whispering in my apartment is harassing me. Like, what are the police gonna do? So Sammy hangs up the phone with Chris after trying to reassure him and just hopes that whatever that was doesn't happen again. But unfortunately for Chris, the night of the 14th now, he's going to bed again, and he starts hearing the whispers, and immediately he's out there looking, lights on. He's looking for these whispers. They keep disappearing. He can't find the source. He's getting frustrated. He's scared. He keeps seeing that thing dart around his apartment. Except this night, he also noticed that he would look, and he could get close enough to where he could break out the silhouette of what looked like a person, like lingering in the corner of his apartment, but he'd go closer to it and it would disappear. It was like the manifestations of what he was seeing, the whispers and this figure running around his apartment, were becoming more vivid. But he's also thinking, like, I didn't sleep the night before. This could be my imagination. Like, I don't know if this is happening, but he's spiraling and he knows it. So the next day on the 15th, he doesn't call Sammy, but he calls a couple of his other friends that are anonymous, and they would all tell police that they got a similar story that Sammy had gotten that first night after the 14th. No matter what was happening, Chris believed it was happening, and Chris was terrified. But this wasn't even the worst of it yet. So that night on the 15th, Chris gets in bed, and now he's barely slept for 2 consecutive nights, and he's determined to just go to sleep. That he's trying to tell himself that everything that you've experienced the past couple nights is probably brought on by stress. It's brought on by now certainly a lack of sleep. So he's telling himself, like, just go to sleep. Just get in bed and go to sleep. So he gets in bed and he's laying there, and he does fall asleep. But he wakes up in the middle of the night and he can't move his body. He's paralyzed. He can't move, and he's totally awake. And he starts hearing whispering. And now his level of fear is so high because now he's immobile. But the past 2 nights he's heard that whispering in his apartment, and he's seen that figure moving around his apartment. And so he's laying there in darkness because he went to bed in darkness, and he starts hearing whispering outside his room, and then it stops. And then he starts hearing whispering inside of his closet, and then it stops. And then he hears whispering right underneath his bed, and he can't move. And he's just laying there praying that nothing horrible is going to happen to him, that this is just a dream. And then out from underneath his bed, right next to him, he can only turn his eyes. This black figure, this shadowy black figure emerges right next to his bed. And it's looking down at him. He can't make out any facial expressions, but he can clearly define, a figure is hovering over him. And it reaches down and puts its hands around his neck and begins to throttle him. And Chris is like gagging. He can't breathe, but he can't move. And at some point, the thing begins to lift him off of his bed by his neck and then throws him back down. And then the figure vanishes. Chris still couldn't move. He's choking to breathe, but he can't move. And he's just waiting for this thing to come back. And he knows that more than likely, whatever this is probably going to kill him this night. So he's laying there just thinking, oh my God, I'm about to die. I'm about to die. But the thing doesn't come back. And Chris can't move. And at some point, Chris, probably out of just pure, adrenaline crash or something, he falls asleep. And so when Chris wakes up and he can move again, he notices there's blood inside of his bed on his sheets. And And then he looks at his hands, and at the tips of all 10 fingers are these incisions, like someone had intentionally cut open the top of every finger, something he certainly didn't do. And his bed is covered in blood from these 10 cuts on his hands. And then he feels his neck, and it feels tender. And it turns out he had marks on his neck. It was all bruised up from this thing choking him out. And it brought him back to like, that really happened. He's now like actually in fear for his life. Chris immediately calls Sammy and tells Sammy everything that happened. And Sammy can't believe any of it. She felt helpless because she's on the other side of the country. She can't help him. And Chris is just petrified. And he's like, he can barely speak, he's like unable to articulate what's happening. He's describing these cuts on his hand and his neck, but there's no one in his apartment. And Sammy's trying to get him to call the police, but Chris is like, I can't call the police. What am I gonna tell him? That a shadowy figure is coming in my apartment and choking me? They're gonna think I'm crazy. Chris decides he's gonna approach this head on. Maybe that woman in San Francisco did put some curse on me. I need to go at least research it. And so there was a religious bookstore right near his house that he figured might have some things on demonic possession and demons, the occult. And he goes in there and he kind of awkwardly approaches the store owner and is like, I'm looking for, books about demons and witchcraft and like how to protect yourself against that. And the guy points him towards a section of the store. And so Chris goes over there, he scoops up a whole bunch of books. He also buys like a whole bundle of crucifixes. So like at least 10. So he's got all these crucifixes, he's got all these books about demonic possession and witchcraft. He buys all of that and he leaves and he goes back to his apartment. When he gets back after doing some research, he ends up putting these crucifixes all over his apartment, like every room. And he takes salt and he draws a line all through his apartment against the baseboard of every wall in the house. And at every corner of the house, he'd pile up little piles of salt. He was gonna do all the things that people say to do if you're dealing with demons or ghosts or anything through witchcraft. He was kind of grasping at straws a little bit. So he went out and did everything he thought he could possibly do to protect himself. That night, which was April 16th, we don't know what happened to Chris, but something scared him so badly that in the middle of the night, in a full panic, he runs out of his apartment and he checks into a hotel and does not stay at his apartment. The next morning, April 17th, when Sammy called Chris to check on him. Now remember, this is 1999. There was just landline phones. So she calls his landline at his apartment to check on him. There's no answer because he's not there. He's at the hotel. And Sammy, who's been speaking to Chris and other friends that have been speaking to Chris, and everyone's concerned about his mental health and what's going on with him, when she doesn't get Chris to pick up his phone, she calls the police and she says, hey, I'm concerned about my friend. Can you do a welfare check on this guy? And they go over to his apartment and it's locked and they kind of look in the windows and everything just seems kind of quiet. And so they leave and they tell Sammy like, hey, look, it's locked. We can't really do anything. Let us know if you don't hear from him in the next couple of days. And so that was it. And so Sammy's like super concerned. And so she goes to work on the 17th. And then when she gets back, she has a voicemail from Chris, who had called her at some point during the day while she was out. And on the voicemail, Chris tells her in a voice that was different than the past few days. The past few days, he was scared. He was really scared. This time, he is defeated. He was like resigned to whatever was going on. And he says to Sammy on the voicemail, he's under attack. And that tonight, they're gonna kill me. And there's nothing I can do. As soon as she's done listening to the message, Sammy calls Chris, but she can't get in touch with him. She knows she just talked to the police who were there at his apartment that day. They're probably just going to tell her like, hey, wait until tomorrow. We just told you, earlier, just give it a couple days. And so she just decides that she's going to go to bed and she's going to try calling him again on April 18th. On the morning of April 18th, Chris didn't show up for work. And word got back to Sammy, who was already going to reach out to Chris that morning anyways. But, the friends and family are talking about what's going on with Chris. And so word got back to her that Chris had missed work. And so she calls Chris. He's not picking up from his landline. And now she calls the police back and she says, hey, you were there yesterday. I know it was locked, but he hasn't shown up for work today. Everybody's concerned about him. Can you please go over and check? And so the police go back over to Chris's apartment, and this time the front door is unlocked. And they go inside and they're met with this very strange scene. You know, you have all these crucifixes that are on the wall. You have the salt that lines every room in the house. There are all these candles that have burned down to the wick. There are little scraps of paper all over the apartment that were handwritten, little messages that Chris was leaving all over the house, warding off spirits and demons. I mean, it just looked like out of a Hollywood set for some demonic movie or something. And they search the house and there's no sign of Chris. They're yelling for him. There's no sign of him. And they make their way into the bathroom where they discover Chris's body. Chris was in his bathtub. No water in the bathtub. He's fully clothed. There's all these candles all around the outside of this bathtub. There's, you know, more crucifixes and weird relics that are in the bathroom with him. And he's on his knees and he's slouched up against the wall with his hands kind of tucked against his chest. He had no external injuries. He was just dead. And so the police take Chris's body and the coroner comes in and does a report, and it comes out that Chris died of natural causes. He died of a heart attack. And so when friends and family saw that that was his cause of death, they didn't buy it. They were like, I don't know how to describe what happened to him. But over the past 7 days, Chris went from this happy, healthy, successful guy to a complete raving paranoid lunatic. And no one knows why. You know, it's certainly possible that it was just a very poorly timed heart attack, you know, mixed in with someone having a psychotic break. Or some people say that he really was cursed by that woman in San Francisco and that was the result. I mean, she said, you're going to die within the week, and he literally died within the week. And he described regularly over the phone to his friends and family as this was happening, these horrible experiences at night with these shadow beings in his room and it attacking him. I mean, it's just this crazy story that to this day leaves friends, family, and investigators baffled. So I'd love to hear in the comments what you think happened to Christopher Case. Was this a natural death, or was this something else? Let me know in the comments, and I'll do my best to go through and respond to as many as I possibly can. So if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more videos like this one, I would encourage you to gently slap the like button and then subscribe to my channel and turn on all post notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly 3 to 4 uploads that look an awful lot like the video you just. Or around June 10th, 2021, Jennifer Buell and her 2 sons, 12-year-old Charlie and 7-year-old Johnny, touched down at Cancun International Airport in Cancun, Mexico. The family, who lived in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, was there for a nice long vacation during the kids' summer break, which had started just a few weeks earlier. After getting off the plane and getting their luggage, the Buell family made their way out of the airport and they hopped on a shuttle that brought them to their resort. They were staying at Club Med Cancun, which is a very popular all-inclusive family resort that's located right at the tip of the Riviera Maya. And the Riviera Maya is just stunningly beautiful. It's this stretch on the western side of the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico that's basically all white sand beaches and beautiful clear turquoise water. But Club Med Cancun's fabulous location was not the only reason why families loved going there so much. Club Med, the huge hotel company behind this particular resort, is known for their gentils organisateurs. They call them GOs for short, and basically these are staff members employed by Club Med at all of their locations everywhere in the world, whose sole job is to make sure the guests staying at their hotels have a truly unforgettable experience. And so these really friendly GOs are always walking around these hotels and talking to the guests and pointing them to the different places they can go within the hotel, and they encourage the guests to interact with each other and to participate in resort activities. And so a stay at a Club Med hotel, whether it's Cancun or anywhere in the world, is known to be very upbeat and highly interactive. So Jennifer and her 2 sons, they get off the shuttle at Club Med Cancun, they go inside, they get checked in, they make their way to their room, they drop their bags, and then they head out to explore the hotel. And pretty much right away, there were GOs all over the place coming up to welcome them to the hotel and pointing them to the best restaurants, the best places to go swimming, and what activities were coming up that night and what to look forward to that week. And right away, what stood out to the Buell family, specifically Charlie and Johnny, was the kids club / teens club. Basically, the GOs organized really fun games and activities just for the kids, depending depending on what age they were. And so this was really appealing to Charlie and Johnny to go play with other kids. And it was appealing to Jennifer because this would mean she could go off and actually relax because she would have childcare. So, starting that first night and over the next week they were in Cancun, Jennifer made sure they always were around the resort so that the boys could just take off and go hang out with this kids club, teen club whenever they wanted. And so the routine that the Buell family adopted over the course of their vacation was they would get up early, they would go to the white sand beaches right outside of their resort, and then after coming back to the resort, Charlie would almost always cut loose and go hang out for the rest of the day with the kids in the teen club, kids club, and Johnny, he mostly stayed with his mom, but over the course of the day, he would leave and do one-off activities with the club. And then at 9:15 p.m. at night, the trio would always link up on the pool deck and they would make their way in to see one of the shows that the Geos were putting on, ranging from comedy sketches to circus tricks. And so all in all, the Buell family vacation to Cancun, Mexico was really going as well as it could have been, until a simple game of hide and seek changed everything. Today's video is sponsored by Rocket Money, formerly Truebill. When you become an adult, two things always happen. Number one, you immediately develop flu-like symptoms and they never really go away. And two, you sign up at the 400,000 yen annual subscription level to swearatawalrus.com, the beloved company that allows people to scream obscenities right at walruses' stupid faces, either in person or on a Zoom call. And while of course really giving it to a walrus is totally exhilarating, it is a fleeting pleasure. After all, studies have shown the average adult only cusses out 2.3 walrus before moving on to swearing at other animals like the ancient Egyptian Sphinx or various sea serpents. But the problem is, when we all inevitably fall out of love with swearatawalrus.com, we often, me included, forget to cancel our costly subscription. And this is why I signed up for Rocket Money. Rocket Money is the all-in-one finance platform that helps you save more and spend less. They do this in a variety of ways, including renegotiating your bills, from your internet service bills to your cable and phone bills. Rocket Money will alert you of important changes that impact your credit score, and they will give you insights to improve it. And most importantly, Rocket Money will scan the internet for all those random subscriptions you've forgotten about, like swearatawalrus.com, and they will cancel them for you. So, if you like berating walruses and not losing money, then Rocket Money is for you. To save more and spend less, join the 3.4 million members using Rocket Money. And I got the hookup. Go to rocketmoney.com/MrBallen or click the link in the description below. That's rocketmoney.com/MrBallen to get started for free. Okay, back to the story.
Inside
On June 18th, so roughly 1 week after the Buell family had arrived in Mexico, the family got up and they began their typical vacation routine. They headed to the beach, and then afterwards, Charlie broke off and went to spend time with the kids at the Teen Club Kids Club, and Johnny and Jennifer, they mostly stayed together for the rest of the afternoon. That evening, around 8:30 p.m., after all three of the Buells had had dinner, they decided to split up before rejoining at 9:15 to go in and see a show. Johnny wanted to head downstairs and go see a kids-only show. Jennifer wanted to head up to the second level to have chocolate fondue dessert with a friend she had made at the resort, and Charlie wanted to meet up with his friends from the Kids Club Teens Club out on the pool deck where the GOs were organizing a big game of hide and seek. And so after watching his mother walk upstairs to the fondue restaurant and watching his younger brother head downstairs to the kids-only show, Charlie turned and ran towards the pool deck. And when he got there, he immediately linked up with his best friend from the vacation, a 13-year-old named Cyrus. And very quickly after that, the GOs who were on the pool deck with all these other kids that were out there, they said, okay, we're going to start counting. You guys all hide. And so the GOs, they walked to the side of this big pool deck, they covered their eyes, they began counting, and all the kids, Charlie and Cyrus included, scattered to find the best hiding spot. And right away, as Charlie and Cyrus are looking for places to hide, they're seeing the other kids are taking up all the best hiding spots. And so for a second, they're panicking. They're not going to have a good spot. Then both of the boys looked over to the side of the pool deck, and they realize there is a perfect hiding spot that nobody's taken. Around the outside of this huge open-air pool deck was a metal fence. It was only a couple of feet tall, and it was made up of metal bars so you could see right through it. It was basically in place just to denote the edges of the resort property. And on one length of this perimeter fence, the south side of this fence, there was a gate built into this fence. And this gate was almost always closed and locked. The only time it was opened was when a GO or another hotel staff member would open it to lead guests out of the resort property to go off and do some excursion. But for some reason, on the night of June 18th, this fence was wide open. On the other side of this fence was just a small rectangular platform that jutted out about 10 feet from the pool deck, same level as the pool deck. And if you were standing on this platform with your back to the pool deck, on your left side would be a very small flight of stairs, just a couple of steps going down. And so Charlie and Cyrus, they look over and they see this gate is open, and they know there are those stairs kind of tucked down below the platform, and they're thinking, if we crouch down on those steps, no one will see us from the pool deck. We'll be obscured from view. And so Charlie and Cyrus, they run over to the open gate, they go through, they walk down a couple of steps, and they kind of tuck themselves down so they can barely look up and over onto the pool deck to see if anyone's coming, but they can tell there's no way anyone is going to see them unless they literally walk through the gate and are looking down the steps at them. And so Charlie and Cyrus, they're giggling with excitement because they know they have found the perfect hiding spot. And they're listening as the GOs are calling out, okay, ready or not, here we come. And after a couple of minutes, they're hearing the sound of the GOs finding all the other kids all over the pool deck. You know, there were some really good hiding spots, but eventually all the kids are found except for Charlie and Cyrus. And so Charlie and Cyrus, they start looking at each other and they're really excited about this, but they know no one's going to find them. But right before Cyrus and Charlie stood up and revealed themselves, Cyrus happened to notice there was a hose, like a garden hose, that was draped down the steps that they were on, and for some reason, the water was turned on. And so Cyrus grabbed the hose, and as he stood up, turning away from Charlie, he began spraying the water onto the pool deck, onto the GOs and all the kids who didn't know where they were. And so everybody on the pool deck is suddenly laughing and running away from the water. It's totally chaos, and Cyrus thinks it's hysterical. He's still just spraying everybody down. And then at some point, Cyrus stops and turns to see what Charlie's reaction is to this absolute bedlam that he's created on the pool deck. But when Cyrus turns around, Charlie's not there. Meanwhile, two other hotel guests who had nothing to do with this game of hide and seek, it was a mother and her adult son, they were having a meal up in the second floor restaurant that overlooked the pool deck. And as they're sitting there enjoying their meal, they suddenly hear the sound of boys screaming. Now, immediately, they both can tell this is not a play scream. Someone is actually in danger, someone is hurt, something's going on here, and they try to look down onto the pool deck where these screams seem to be coming from, but they can't tell. It's dark out there. there. They can't see what's going on. And so acting on instinct, the woman and her son just stand up and start running through the restaurant and making their way downstairs. And as they're doing this, the woman's husband actually sees her charging through, and he, along with two other boys that happen to be near him, just start running after them, knowing that whatever's going on, it's bad, so they have to go help. And so when these 5 people get down to the pool deck, they hear the sound of the boys screaming again, and they can tell it's coming from that open gate, that platform area where Charlie and Cyrus had been hiding. And so these 5 people charge through the still open gate. They go out onto this platform and they look down the little flight of stairs and they see Cyrus. They don't see anybody else on the platform. It's just this one boy, and he looks totally shaken up, totally hysterical, and it's clear he is one of the boys that was screaming. And then before they could even ask him what was going on, they hear a sound coming from somewhere below the steps, and they all turn, and literally out of the darkness, Charlie just suddenly emerges, and he looks up at the adults and just says in a very calm voice, "Save me, save me." This normally completely off-limits, fenced-off platform that jutted out past the pool deck where the boys were hiding, that was actually a dock that sat over a swampy lagoon, and underneath that dock was a nest of crocodiles. And when Cyrus and Charlie were on that lower step, the crocodiles had noticed them, and when Cyrus had stood up and begun spraying the water onto the pool deck, one of those crocodiles, a 13-foot monster, had come out of the water, turned around, and literally leapt up onto those steps, bit Charlie by the leg, and pulled him into the water. The screams that woman and her son had heard while they were in that restaurant were Cyrus's and Charlie's, because initially when Charlie was pulled into the water, he didn't go directly under. And so Cyrus had managed to grab onto Charlie's arms, and he was trying to pull Charlie out of the crocodile's mouth, and the two of them were screaming for help. But by the time that woman and the other 4 people got down to the platform, Cyrus lost his grip on Charlie, and the croc and Charlie went under the water. And so those 5 people were standing there when the crocodile and Charlie just came back out of the water. And that's when Charlie was saying, "Save me, save me." He was in the crocodile's mouth. And when these 5 people saw Charlie and understood what was going on, without any hesitation, the adults leapt into the dark lagoon waters that are clearly infested with crocodiles and began beating the crap out of this crocodile. And while this melee is happening in these dark, murky lagoon waters with crocodiles everywhere, someone had gone into the fondue bar and told Jennifer, "Your son's being attacked by a crocodile." And she instantly leapt up and just ran across the restaurant, knocking anything over that was in her way. And finally, she got downstairs to the pool deck. She went through that gate out to that platform, and she saw her boy. Charlie was laying on his back, surrounded by totally frantic and hysterical adults. Charlie's leg looked like it had been through a meat grinder, but Charlie was awake and he was talking to the adults near him. In the time it took Jennifer to run through the restaurant and get down to the pool deck, those adults who had leapt into the murky lagoon water to fight with this crocodile had literally beaten it so badly that it released Charlie. And according to the people who watched this happen, this crocodile was putting up an unbelievable fight. It was whipping its head side to side, tearing into Charlie's leg. It kept pulling Charlie deeper and deeper into the water. And these adults just didn't stop. They were yanking on this crocodile, punching its eyes, gouging its eyes, and finally it worked. When Charlie was finally pulled to safety and was laying on the dock, he was in rough shape, and no one knew if he was going to survive or not. But luckily, there just happened to be a trauma nurse who was staying at the resort, who came outside. She assessed the situation, and she took charge. She stopped the bleeding in his leg, and she stayed with him and kept him calm until paramedics finally arrived. Charlie would be rushed to the hospital, where he would immediately undergo several surgeries that would save his life. Also, surgeons were able to miraculously save his leg. Initially, it seemed like he might have to have it amputated. As for Club Med, their response to this incident was enormous. Not only did they pay for all of Charlie's medical bills, but they also invested a lot of money into securing not only that fence and gate that led to the dock where he was attacked, but also just generally speaking around the resort to make sure there were no more attacks. Today, Charlie is back in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania with his family, and considering the horrible trauma he went through, he's remarkably well adjusted. In fact, in the Halloween that followed this attack, Charlie dressed up as a crocodile. So that's going to do it. If you got something out of this episode and you haven't done this already, the next time you're working at the local county fair selling ice cream and the like button comes up to you and asks for a vanilla ice cream cone, sell it to them, but replace the vanilla ice cream with vanilla mayonnaise. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. We have a podcast called the MrBallen Podcast that puts out brand new, never before heard stories on Monday mornings and remasters of our best YouTube videos on Thursday mornings. Currently, that podcast is available everywhere, but starting on November 1st of this year, our podcast is going to be shifted exclusively to Amazon Music. We now have a registered 501c3 charitable organization called the MrBallen Foundation that makes it as easy as possible for you to join me, my family, and my team in supporting those whose lives have been most impacted by violent and heinous crimes. Monthly donors to the MrBallen Foundation Honor Them Society will receive free gifts and exclusive invites to special live events. But the real reward is helping to rewrite the ending to the story for victims of violent crime. Go to MrBallen.Foundation and click on Get Involved to join the Honor Them Society today. We also have 2 additional YouTube channels. One is called MrBallen Shorts. The other is called MrBallen en Espanol. We also have a Facebook, Snapchat, and TikTok page, all called MrBallen, that put out near daily content. If you want to get in touch with me, please follow me on any major social media platform and then send me a direct message. My username is just @MrBallen, and I really do read the majority of my DMs. We also have some really cool merchandise, so head on over to shopmrballen.com to have a look. And if you have a story suggestion, please submit it to our subreddit, just called MrBallen. It's linked in the description below. So whether I see you on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, Facebook, other YouTube channels, the podcast, wherever, just know that I really appreciate your support. And until next time, that's going to do it. See ya.